Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and we are going to see a masterpiece from Mikhail Tal. This game was played in 1953 between Mikhail Tal and Isak Birbrager, a Norwegian chess player at that time. And this game was absolutely stunning. Isak goes d4, and Mikhail Tal responds with knight f6, c4, and now the move c5. Now, this is the beginning of something called the Benoni defense. And this was very common at that time where people used to play this Benoni defense in competitive gameplays. But nowadays, these lines are completely refuted by the engine. So probably in online games, you might see one or two of these, but not in competitive play anymore. The top grandmasters don't really like this when going against the very top. So game continues. He plays v5, standard move. And now Mikhail Tal plays e6, challenging the pawn in the center. White responds with knight c3, just enforcing the queen and the knight, both attacking and defending. It's pretty balanced at this position, but you can already notice that white is slightly a bit better according to the engine. This is because this is just not like white has an actual advantage, but it's just the structure. Now, black takes and white takes back with the c-pawn, and now white has successfully traded one of the center pawns of black for his flank pawn. So this pawn now sits here, and it's kind of a thrown because it stops the natural development of the knight to this square, right? So the knight cannot go there. So therefore, b6 is played, opening up the light square bishop and providing some more scope. White responds with e4, and now this is how white wants to develop. So he probably wants to give there and block with the knight and then put his knight on f3 and then short castle. That's his plan. That is what happens usually in the Benoni defense. So Mikhail Tal plays g6, trying to fianchetto the bishop onto g7 square, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop d3, and then short castles. Okay, so far so good. But we haven't seen anything explosive yet, but wait for it. It is going to come. So white also castles. And now knight a6. Now this is a bit dubious. The engine rather prefers something like if you could play bishop g4 and h3 and then, takes, and then probably develop the knight to d7. That would have been a better continuation. Right now, what happens if you were to play knight a6, white could simply play a3, and this move completely blocks the vision of the knight because the knight cannot go here. It would have to eat his own pawn, which is not kind of allowed. And if it goes back here, so if the knight was to go back here, so this is not good, right? Because the knight still has not much scope. It cannot go here. It cannot go here without having some support. So that's not going to be very useful. So that is why knight a6 is not the best choice. But white doesn't play a3. White rather plays knight d2, and this allows Tal to jump into the position, attacking the bishop, which for now is undefended. So white naturally defends the bishop. Rook e8. And now a3 is played. So the white has to go back, but now he does have some scope, so he goes back here. Now it's going to come the other way around. White plays rook e1 and knight c7, queen c2. Now this is all to just overprotect the pawn and also developing the queen, because in future he might have ideas like f4 and then f5 breaking into the position of white, and that is very much possible because this bishop right now is not developed and he would like to develop it somehow. So first he plays f4 and then this knight f3 and probably bishop g5, and white has a lot of ideas. But Mikhail Tal plays rook b8, and this is correct because since this side of the board is something white is aiming for, you should always go on this side. So probably something like a6 and then b5 and then b4, and these are the ideas. White immediately stops any b5 ideas with the move a4 and now b6. Mikhail Tal just solidifying the position, allowing knight b5 and now a6, simply forcing the knight to take a decision whether it wants to jump into the position or go back or trade itself. So it trades and queen c7, and now the position is fairly equal. After rook a2, black plays queen e7, and now this is the beginning of the end because Mikhail Tal is now ready. And after this next move, which is f3, which is a blunder, you can say, because this allows the f4 square to be occupied, and it also allows for expansions like f5. But in order to play f5, you must move your knight. So Mikhail Tal does that. He simply moves his knight to h5. White goes knight f1, but now f5. And f5 comes with a lot of threats. First of all, this diagonal is not a problem for the black king because this is blocked by white's own pawns and there are no checks for now at least, which means, and now also, you cannot really take this because it would be taken. So if you were to take this pawn, it is going to be fatal because there are so many ideas like bishop d4 check and also simply bishop f5 attacking the queen is enough. And you cannot play bishop d3 because the rook hangs. So there are a lot of ideas in the position. So you cannot simply afford to do that. So what you rather do is what white played in the game, bishop d3. And now f4, a very important move. You do not take the pawn. You do not take the pawn. Because if you do that, now white's rook is active, white's bishop is active, white's queen is also looking as the same e4 square. And now if you were to trade on e4, it's simply a losing game because you are simply giving white the chance to open up his pieces, which are right now very clamped. You can see the knight has no movement. It cannot go here, it cannot go here. It can simply go back here, but that's not useful. So you simply lock the position with f4. Now white lashes out with g4. And this is a very committal move because you cannot go backwards. Pawns don't move backwards. And g4 forces a very interesting choice. Many of you might be very tempted to do en passant here. But en passant is not the best move here, of course, because it's defended by the pawn, it's defended by the knight, and it allows the knight to get back into the game. What you play here is bishop d4 check first. The white king moves to h1, and now you simply play queen h4. You completely sacrifice the knight. Because what happens if the knight is sacrificed? If the knight is sacrificed, you simply pick up the rook. I bet you didn't see that, or maybe you did. But this rook was hanging all along, and that was the idea of queen h4. So you cannot do that. So what can you do? So he plays rook e2, firstly, defending his rook. And now there are a lot of ideas. Even the simple knight g3 check seems to be the best option because it forces a knight trade. And of course, you cannot take with the pawn or you will just hang your king. And you cannot move really somewhere. If you move here, that's going to be way too dangerous and you're going to lose the rook anyway because it's a fork, right? So Mikhail Tal simply plays queen h3. He didn't go for the knight g3. Probably he didn't like something in here, but that was kind of the best option. Rook g2 played. Now Mikhail simply picks up a pawn and Tal, after picking up the pawn, is now in a very good position to deliver the final blow. So white responds with knight d2 because he wants to attack the queen. The queen moves to e3 and now the knight goes back. The queen moves back here and the knight moves back here. So this was probably a repetition of moves only twice. Sometimes this happens in competitive over-the-board games to gain some time on the clock because in classical chess you have some increments. I am not exactly sure what was the time increment format in that game, but this is what happens. But right now, what do? Your queen is attacked. You have good scope here. You might give a check, but if you give a check now, what's going to happen is simply pawn takes. And now anything else is not useful because your queen is hanging. You cannot take back with the pawn because your queen is hanging. So what do? Of course, you sacrifice your queen. And this queen sacrifice, bishop g4, a brilliant move. But according to the engine, if knight f3 was played, and it was played in the game, after a careful series of calculated moves, you would be able to win with white. But now that is the thing that people are not stockfish. They are not engines and they're not going to play as an engine would play. And that is why Mikhail Tal had famously said that there are two kinds of sacrifices, the correct ones and mine. And of course, white plays knight f3, bishop f3, which is the only move, of course. And now the rook is pinned. What do? So white lashes out with h4, but that's not enough because first of all, the rook is pinned and you see a lot of danger because your king does not really have a breathing room. So you can give a check here, but that's not going to be extremely useful. So first Mikhail Tal plays rook f8, supporting the pawn and also preparing a rook left if needed. White goes bishop e2, but now knight g3 check comes in, and because now the bishop can be taken with a check using the knight, so we have king h2. Now, rook takes g2 first. You have to take the bishop because you cannot take the knight. It was simply protected by the pawn. And it would further open up the rook. And now simply knight takes bishop because after queen takes, you really have this check. And now this picks up the queen. So once you pick up the queen, You can clearly see the material advantage here. Black is simply up a pawn. It's a 2 versus 1 majority on the king side, and black would love to win this game instead, and he does, because rook f8 check, and after a few moves, black wins by resignation because you cannot simply defend. So even if you were to do this, so now both of your pawns are hanging, cannot say burn, so you're going to lose another. That doesn't make sense. So you can play any move you like. Black is simply going to gobble up everything. So that is not defendable. So if you go back and simply see how beautiful this sacrifice was. So if you see here, after the move knight d2, you can play something again, queen e3, trying to protect the knight, but bishop g4 is just gigantic. It's big brain stuff, and this is something what Mikhail Tal did day in and day out. Really hope you liked the video. Thank you for watching, and do leave a comment.